Great. So again, thank you for availing me with your time. I don't know if you had a chance to look over the documents from the 1974 Cairo Symposium, where Sar Sanoran was settling matters between Professor Abdullah and Sheikh Anta Diop concerning, well, obviously they were talking about the peopling of Egypt, and in their conversation, race matters came up. And so as we had this conversation now, we figured that's like an antiquated taxonomy. That's not really working for how they looked at things back in the day. But nevertheless, this conversation happened 50 years ago in 1974, and then for their time period, it seemed somewhat appropriate that they looked at things that way. That was one of the leading questions about Egypt and Egyptology for a long period of time. And so then in the attestation, Sir Sanoran put forth to say Black people, the ancient Egyptians would have said Kemet or Kemu and not Kemetiu. And then he went on to say, I'll bring up the quote, he went on to say that nevertheless, that this attestation was not used. They didn't use Kim to talk about the other quote unquote Black people that they knew from the hinterlands from the Old Kingdom forward. And so I know it sounds already like it's kind of loaded, the question, but it's really not, because actually we were spending a while doing this research, and there's nothing that attests to what Sir Sanoran says can be found in Egyptology. So this is why I beseech your expert opinion. You know?
Yeah, so I guess as just a kind of just general kind of statement before we begin is that, like, I do not pretend to be able to tell you what the Egyptians thought, or kind of what they definitively meant. Egypt was, people are diverse, people are complicated, every term has multiple meanings. So just because, from a grammatical perspective or a textual perspective, it might seem like it means one thing in one context, doesn't mean that in another context it doesn't mean something completely different.
Exactly.
But following up on, and so the other interesting thing, you said this was the debate that was happening in the 70s. This debate is still going on today, and especially within Egypt and the surrounding areas, and it's not a pretty debate. It's an extremely ugly debate where very, very nasty things are said. So I also just wanted to kind of, acknowledge that. And you see, especially, I feel like you see especially kind of more authoritarian systems of power kind of trying to engage with it, always with the idea that Egypt is something that people want to claim. And there's nothing wrong with claiming ancient Egypt, but there may be something suspicious about claiming ancient Egypt to the exclusion of others. To say that it's a monolithic thing and it's therefore my thing and therefore not your thing, I think that's where I start to get a sense of discomfort. But so to go back to the comment of Sauron. So basically what he is saying is that you quite correctly point out that the word for black in Medu Necher, should we call it, is Kem, or what comes out in Coptic as Kema or Kem, something like that. The way that the Egyptians made abstracts was with a feminine. So if they wanted to say like the black person, what they would have probably written, again, theoretically, because I can't really tell you any examples that I have of them calling anyone, whether it's themselves, a foreigner, a Nubian, a black person. I don't think that I have any examples of this. But what they would have done, so they would have used the phonetic signs chem, and then they would have had a classifier of a seated man. And again, there's ways of even distinguishing between foreign or Egyptian and foreign in the way that that seated figure would have looked. So for example, if they show an Egyptian man or someone like kind of culturally coded to be Egyptian, then you can tell that they're understanding this person as Egyptian. If they show them, perhaps with a feather on their head or, with kind of some other kind of foreign significance or signifier, then this might be showing that they're, being distinguished from the normal Egyptian population. But again, we don't have any of this, as far as I'm concerned. We don't, or as far as I know, we don't have any kind of people that are called the Black people, to my knowledge. What instead we have is this kind of abstract feminine form, Kemet, which means not the Black one, but that which is Black. So this is kind of the way that you make feminines in Egyptian and also in some Semitic languages as well. So then what then happens when you have Kemet and then you add the Nisba ending E or EU for the plural, what you have is saying the one who is associated with that which is Black rather than the Black one. So I think that's what Sauron's point is in that kind of contribution, or in that passage that you've brought to our attention.
Interesting about the Kemet EU specifically. Some argue that when that type of nisba is formed, it's typically toponymic and not related to the root. Like it dismarries the meaning of the root, or divorces the meaning of the root, and just simply means inhabitants of, and some translate that as you see, they say inhabitants of Egypt. But if ancient Egyptians could not have meant inhabitants of Egypt, because that seems to espouse some type of anachronism to where they would not have even known that term yet. And so you don't detach it from the root, but still there's the question of whether that Blackness is a reality that has to do with people or the Nile silks, which we know to be so prevalent. And there are also a bunch of other Black realities, how much they, the Apis and the Kemet, the divine cattle herd, and all of these things that we could throw in there to see which one they were actually talking about. And so I started to share my screen, but I think I chose a I chose the wrong thing. So if I could share some things.
Yeah, please go on ahead. While you're navigating the complex Zoom window, I will also say that another thing to consider is that, like me personally, I am not sure when ancient texts use the word Kema or Kemet. I am not sure what they're actually talking about. It's very easy to say, oh yeah, they're talking about Egypt, but I'm not sure they're talking about all of Egypt. Like for example, like so basically what this is to say is that a lot of times when we say Egypt, we think, oh, the ancient understanding of Egypt must be equivalent with the modern understanding of Egypt. And we know that that's simply not the case. And we even know it's not the case from Greek sources. So when, for example, Alexandria, the city, was founded, they didn't call it Alexandria in Egypt. So Alexandria was not understood to be in Egypt itself. It was called Alexandria para Aegyptu, Alexandria near Egypt, nearby Egypt, in the surroundings of Egypt. So that's, again, already hinting, this is a late reference that's pretty well attested. So that's hinting that even, around like 300 BCE, that the understandings that we have of what Egypt is, and the understandings that what Egyptians and what foreigners, what Macedonians or Greeks had of Egypt at that time is pretty different. So I'm going into all of this with kind of, who actually knows what they were talking about, and a good sense of skepticism on all fronts.
I appreciate that. And that's why this conversation has taken so long. So just to segue a little bit to Story of the Eloquent Pheasant, it still regards Kemet, but and I have, this is from Molier's work, and so I actually have his breakdown on the terms that I want to discuss here. And where basically in his tale, if we know, the farmer, I think his name was Den Anubis, or one who Anubis protects, something like that. He wanted to go from the Wadi Hamat area, which is kind of like in the eastern, it's east, is not in what we would consider the Delta, it's the Salt Flats, right? And he wanted to go from there to Kemet. And that raises a big question for his time period. Now, we assess the term Kemet throughout all, yes, it became to lose the original meaning, and it just eventually became a name for the land.
Mhm.
But as we analyze this, a person living in the Wadi Natron saying they want to Hati Kemet, or they wanted to height Kemet, to descend upon or to go down to Kemet, it kind of gives reference that first, in his mind, he wasn't in Kemet. That's easy to be established, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yet he was
Agree.
in, pardon me?
Yeah, no, totally agree. You're absolutely right.
And he was in the areas we know as Kemet, Egypt today. And so it begs the question, what did Kemet actually mean to him?
Yeah.
As we go through the text of the story, he didn't want to do anything agricultural when he got there. He actually, well, people could tie food to agriculture, but he wanted to buy food for his children, it says in the story. And so we'll go back over that. But I just wanted to point out these terms, and it doesn't say go south,
Correct.
but to descend gives a little bit of something. Let's hear what you say there.
Yeah, so no, this is a really interesting example, and it's also a really, I think it's an instructive example because it again just throws all of the assumptions that we normally have, especially like as just reading these texts. It throws all of the assumptions that we think we understand what these things mean, and actually we don't understand what they mean, because everything is more complicated and everything is much more, it's more contextual in a culture that we are approaching from the outside. So you're quite correct in saying that the eloquent peasant in the Wadi Natrun. So again, this is a kind of like a salt flat to the west of the Nile Delta, essentially, but not very far north, not very far south, but west of the Delta. And so it's very clear that he does not, at least in the world of this text, does not picture himself as living in Kemet because he wants to go to Kemet. And it's very clear that he is, moving towards the Nile. One interesting thing, though, you note correctly that he doesn't say he's going south. This is because, so also when we're dealing with Egyptian directions of north and south, we have to keep in mind that their north was our south.
Mm-hmm.
So if they said they're going south, that would actually mean they're going our north.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and those terms are different than the term hai, the verb hai that he uses here. The verb hai actually does mean to go down in terms of descend. So, and this is a reference, and this is always something that people did when leaving the Nile and then coming back to it. You descend into the Nile, or you go down to the Nile because of the valley. So basically if you look at the Egyptian landscape, and especially if you're coming from like a desert location, either to the east or the west, when you get to the Nile, there's going to be a drop because that river has now carved out like territory, like the prehistoric river has, when it was like kind of flowing much more vigorously, much more violently, has kind of eroded a lot of the portions of the land around it. And this has created kind of, this literally the Nile Valley. And so when you go to the Nile, you go down into it. Now, the interesting thing, however, is that obviously this is describing the situation in the valley, which is traditionally taken as the area south of Cairo, or south of Ineb Hedge, to use kind of the first dynasty Egyptian term. But north in the Delta, that wouldn't be the case. So it's not clear, for example, that he's saying, I'm going down. He could just be saying, I'm going down to Egypt, and it just happens, or I'm going down to Kemet, and he just happens to want to go down to Memphis or a location south of Memphis. We know he's going to Heracleopolis.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a location just kind of south of Memphis. But we don't necessarily know that if he were going to say, I'll use the city of Buto, for example, which is on like one of the branches of the Nile. We don't know that if he was going to Buto, for example, maybe he wouldn't say he's going down to Kemet. Maybe he would have had to say something else. And here's where we don't know. So I would not necessarily take this as an example that Kemet is a location only in the south of the country, and that it excludes kind of, or it is only associated with a kind of, more African population. But this doesn't also mean the opposite. It just means something completely different.
Oh yeah, I'm with you on that, and I don't use it to say that. What I think is stronger to say that if was looking for Nile silt, which is Kemet is supposed to mean,
Mm-hmm.
he would have just went east to a closer trip from the Wadi Natron to the Delta. If he was saying, "Yo, I want to go to Kemet," and in his mind, Kemet meant where we find this black silk, I don't think he would have had to go to the destination location of the Heracleopolis magma. I think he went to in that text. And so I agree that it shows that he thought of it a little bit different than we think of it today, and even different than people 1,000 years after him thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it got to the Demotic period, we can clearly see it lost all meanings, and it just was like meaning the nation. And
Mm-hmm.
so I appreciate your commentary on that.
Yeah.
You know,
And I'd say, just to follow up, and again, I'm not saying you're wrong here, because I actually just don't know, especially given the fact that the dams in Aswan have totally changed the way that the Nile floods. I don't know, in the early Middle Kingdom, whether he could have gone to the Delta to get this silt, or if the silt was specifically something that was found in the valley as opposed to found in the Delta. I just don't know that, to be honest. So it's possible, but in my mind, it's not certain.
Yeah, I feel you. And in my limited research, when I looked up the silt, I can't find nothing positive about it. So this will be a better reading right here. I mean, just to elaborate on that, and then we'll talk completely about attestations of the Nile silt or anything that attests to Kemet actually meaning like that. Like this text does multiple things. Because if we look, well, we can read it from the beginning where he's bringing back hands, and then one gave to him gold of a particular type. I don't know what of Kemet. I don't know what the gold of Kemet, but with him, so he put it on both arms. It appears. You see?
So basically, yeah. So this is a very famous text, and you're reading it quite expertly, which is very. I would say again, you're not an average layperson, so I think that's very clear. But yeah. So this is in the context of again, it's in the context again of kind of where the Delta falls into Kemet, which is uncertain for me. And this is also from a period of, I think you also passed on a reference to the Kamoza stela. So not only is kind of like, the static concept of where the border of Kemet was to the north of concern here, but it's also during a period of foreign conquest when these terms might also be under renegotiation. So it's even extra complicated here. But what this is saying is essentially he's going to the Hyksos capital of Avaris, which we know is in the Delta. And basically he's fighting, and then he says during the course of this fighting he took a hand, and then you're absolutely quite correct. Then one gave to me gold of Kenet, which means essentially gold of valor. So be gold because I was particularly brave, I was particularly courageous. And wehem as a repeating occasion. So this is another time that he was given the
so
gold.
It's not on both arms. I thought repeating and then the arm determinative mean he put the gold on both my arms. But he did it multiple times.
Multiple times, yeah. I think if he put it on both arms, he would be very keen to tell you that he had it on both arms, that there was so much, and they would have really emphasized that. The arm here can also mean like an occasion or kind of a matter. So like a repeating of this thing that happened. And then it says, and then one was fighting in this Egypt, or this southern Egypt, or this Egypt south of this town. So again, this means that there was fighting now south of in Egypt. So what he considers to be Egypt, south of Avaris.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. But where Where far south, we don't know. It could be, it's clearly that he's locating this in Kemet, but is this now in the valley? Is he saying that specifically this is in the valley, or is it just in a location south of, still in the delta, but south of Avaris, where now we're having Kemet being, the boundaries of Kemet being determined by political control versus by geography? And so this is a question that I don't know.
Oh, that's very interesting. Now, I want to ask about this ta here. I'm reading this as ta,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm reading this as land. Should this just be the definite article ta, like the, or land though?
I think you're quite right to read it to suggest that it's the demonstrative or the definite article. Because if it was land, it would have used the actual sign for land, which they pretty consistently do, which is kind of, I'm sure you're familiar with it, the long oval with the three dots underneath it. But that being said, it is quite weird to have this or the Egypt. Like that is a weird kind of turn of phrase, and why that is chosen, I'm not sure. Maybe it's to distinguish this new location from the location that he was previously talking about. It's also unclear to me at this point whether ta definitely means the. In certain dialects and in certain kind of, in late Egyptian, it would, but this is written in Middle Egyptian where it might mean this or that. So it's, again, unclear to me.
Okay, now we're getting there because this is what I don't have anyone who can answer these type of questions but you. And so to me, Ni Demi Kim refers back to Kemet as a city and not another place. And so I could pull up the rest of the text, but it seems like he was saying south of this city, Kemet, not south of Avaris.
I would say that it means south of Avaris, because I think if they were going to say, talk about Egypt as a city, I think they'd want to give it a more prestigious, because Demi literally means town. You notice that it doesn't have the city determinative here. And I think Demi is the reason why they're referring to Avaris as a town is because they're saying it's not our thing. It's not good enough to be a city. It's not civilized enough to be an Egyptian city. It's just a town.
I got you. I got you. So basically, I know the geographical situation of things. So that, and I understand how if they had a virus, if the fighting starts breaking out south of there, it's starting to encroach upon the territory that Amos or Kamos had occupied at that time. And so this is wonderful. So just for the record, me and my friends were trying to work this one out. And from your expert opinion, this says southern Egypt.
Yeah, I would translate it because it's a weird, again, it's a weird turn of phrase, because what it literally says is there was fighting in this Egypt, the southern one from this town. So what exactly that means, again, so I gave you my interpretation. That's my best interpretation. That doesn't mean it's absolutely the correct interpretation, because again, this is a little bit of a weird phraseology. So to say it the most literally possible, basically it says there was fighting in that or this Kemet, the southern one of those things of this town.
Okay, I appreciate that. And you don't know how happy I am. I don't know, you can probably see my rosy cheeks, but it's not often that I get to have a discourse like this. I have been reaching out and just in order, I really think the field has more there to be brought to the community or the people and not just reserved for academia. Well, the teaching was reserved for academia, but the enjoyment of Egyptology as a whole, there's a lot more stages that sometimes rival the stages that the university present as far as exposing the information to people. So I really appreciate that you are down to do this. And so here's another attestation I wanted to look at, and this one comes from, I think
This
this
is from
is
the coffin
Spell
text.
189G of coffin text. Now this one is crazy because we have a few reconstructions made by, I think, Hurt Seth And I just want to read, I contacted another, my last book I published recently is called Black Like Osiris. It's on Amazon. I'll send you a copy just for the fun of it. But in working on a volume 2, I actually got this from a linguist PhD who I had look at this text, and what he said was 2 versions of the spell 189G of the coffin text clearly read Haka in Ek, Kemet Tepiu Ta, and that can be translated as you have ruled Egypt, which are on the earth, which is inconsistent as far as number agreement is concerned. If one translates Kemet as Egyptians rather than Egypt, the plural agreement of this phrase Tepiu is consistent with that of Kemet as a plural noun. This interpretation is consistent with that of other lacunary versions of the spell, whose reconstructions appear to have meant to be read Haka in Ek, Kemu Tepiu Ta. In this case, the reference to Egyptians rather than to Egypt is more explicit. It says, since the word for Egyptians, Kemu, is directly derived from the root Kim rather than from the word Kemet, that the plural of the word is marked by the more unambiguous plural marker, U, or W, I should say. It says, and that the word's reference to humans is expressed by the classifier. If these reconstructions and translations are correct, one would have another instance of the word Kim, Egyptian, and thus a further plausibility of the etymological meaning of Kemet as the black ones. Now, this is crazy here, so I will hear from you. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so I agree with half of it, and I'm not seeing the second half. So basically, so what we're looking at here is we're looking at a few different versions. So these are all ancient versions of the same text, but you can see they're all written a little differently. And of course, because we're dealing with evidence that's thousands of years old, not all of it survives. So that's why you have some of it fragmentary. What's interesting here, and you also see that there's some differences. I'm sure you can recognize, here we have Tepiu Ah with then a seated man, a kind of member of the honored dead. So this is in the second, sorry, I'm not sure, I realize that you can't see my mouse, but this is the second column from your left. So
okay, you see my mouse?
Yes, I can. Yours is the blue
down
dot,
here
right?
when you say Tepiu Ta.
Yeah, so Tepiu Ta, so that's one version. But then if you go to your left 2 columns, yeah, right there. So there you also see Tepiu Ah, not Tepiu Ta. So with the iron arm, and then with a kind of seated mummified person as a classifier. And then compare this with the very first version on your left, which is just Tepiu Ta, where there's clearly no people being meant. There's no human classifier. It's just the word for land. So that's kind of that. So we're looking at not only one version, but we're looking at kind of the Egyptians themselves are trying to say, okay, well, what was this actually saying? And they're coming up with a few different versions of what they think that this text is trying to say or what they want it to say. Now, this is also from a coffin text, and the coffin texts, like the pyramid text before them, are very unique in the way that they're writing the Medu Neter. So what they like to do, for example, they like to drop any weak consonants. And sometimes they like to write only the bare minimum number of glyphs that are required. And so based on that, and if we take kind of the version to the far left as kind of the simplest, I do agree with this author's statement that we should be understanding this as you ruled the Egyptians, Kemet to you, rather than Kemet. So again, restoring the yod and the W after the T as weak consonants. Those who are on the earth. So basically just saying you ruled the people of Kemet, those who are on the earth. So that I see very clearly, and that I do agree with the author there. Where I am more hesitant to follow the author is when they then turn to say, this is consistent with the other lacunary versions of the spell, whose reconstruction appears to have meant to be read as Heka en Ek Kemu Tepiu Ta. because I don't see any examples here where that T is not preserved for us.
I'm sorry. You mean the Kemet T
Yeah,
right
so
here?
I see the Kemetiu, but I
Mhm.
don't see any versions of Kemu. So where
Okay,
the
so I
T,
think I want to explain something that I probably should have gave you. The star here, and it goes back to footnote number 7, where he argued that Kurt Self argued that this K and this M, he argued that what was missing here was the Uchik. So you see the Uchik here with a man, and then we see the Uchik here. So it could be argued that it is a complete Kemet here, but then there's not enough space for the reed leaf and the Uchik to make that be a commit to you. So I think the argument is based on what is stated by this reconstructance, that there is a Uchik here. You see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but again, and this is now speculation because this is lost, but I would not also, because every other version that we have that does preserve the word preserves a T here, I would say that there's enough room for a quail chick and a T.
Okay.
Because a lot of times you could have the chick kind of like, because the chick has a natural kind of like slant to it, so it's really easy to squeeze that T, that half kind of bread loaf, in like above its back, so it can still fit within kind of one square or rectangular portion. Of course, now I'm speculating here.
No,
This is
that's
just my
fine.
best
We've
guess. Yeah,
all speculated. That's perfectly fine.
yeah.
But in that
Those.
hypothesis,
Mhm.
you say they omitted the reed leaf just because Kemet U is a construct we really never find.
I think we do find it, again, because the reed leaf as a weak consonant and the W as a weak consonant are likely to be dropped in certain religious texts.
I never found because my
Yeah.
lack of my limited research. I apologize. I don't know what you probably with a KMT without the reed leaf and a Uchik. I couldn't. You know where I could find that at?
I don't have the reference. I don't have a reference offhand, but I could say that it would not be. I don't think it would be particularly weird.
Yeah,
Um,
I hear you.
yeah.
Yeah, and so that's interesting, and that shares a lot of light on some of the things. And so we're
Wait,
30 minutes in.
can we go back for 1 second? I had more
Yes,
to
sir.
say about the other versions.
Okay.
So notice, so that's just the first version. That's, or the first and last version. So the version on the left and the version on the right, and then some of the versions in the middle as well, where they say, you ruled the Kemetiu, those who are on the earth. It's interesting though that the other versions, for example, specifically the second and the third one, kind of play with this. Well, the third one says the Kemetiu, those who are on earth. But the second version, then whatever it was, it said, whether it says Kemu or Kemiu or Kemetiu, who knows? But then the phrase after it, Tepiu ah, not Tepiu ta, but Tepiu ah. This is a word for ancestors. So I, like you having ruled the Kemetiu or the Kemiu, the ancestral ones. So there we see a variation. And so I'm not sure if
Okay.
it's kind of important to your research, but I did want to point it out because
That's very important. Now
yeah.
I stumbled and fumbled on that Tepu for a minute. I couldn't find examples of it in other places.
Yeah, it's a word for ancestors, essentially, or like primordial forefathers.
So like Ats are at the root of Atef, like fathers, or Atef.
No, it's different. It literally means like those who are first of action or those who are first of occasion, something like that. It's a
Oh,
totally different root. Um, and it's also one of these words where like in order to find it in the dictionary, like sometimes you have to look under tep, sometimes you have to look under
that's what
ah.
I'm. So it's
Yeah.
kind of like a phrase in a way, like
Yeah.
Tepu ah.
Yeah.
Okay, I appreciate that. And so yeah, well, I don't have much to say about that. I don't have any disagreements. I see how you see these things, and that you saying that there could be space here for what
Here,
uh,
I'm gonna draw a little diagram for you, or a little mock hieroglyph of how I think there could have been space.
yeah, word up.
So something like this, where you have
So I'm going to stop sharing so we can see
oh
this.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, so then now if that's the case, if they wanted to write that, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they have just put a TU bird? If space was an issue, TU bird would have solved it.
They could have also put a TU bird instead of a quail chick. It could have just been a TU bird. That's another option.
So when I ask myself, then if I'm the artist then and I'm trying to say something and I'm pressed for space and I have a glyph that fits, then I need, and me trying to figure it out, I need a reason why he didn't use that. And you know what I'm saying? I'm saying in order to answer my own queries, I'm like, was he just like, no? And it's plenty of instances of that, you know what I'm saying? Where I'm like, why did he just omit it? We know about graphic transposition and everything. Most of the people who will follow this video, if I get to release it, they will possibly know what we're talking about too. We have a small audience of somewhat novice grammarians who really love your field of work. And so your opinion is going to be, trust me, people are going to say, the Egyptologist said, that's what I'm going to hear a whole lot of, you know what I mean? And so,
so it's interesting because especially as someone, so I work with like the main focus of my research lately has been religious texts of the New Kingdom that are written in a ornamentally, sometimes called cryptographic or enigmatic script. So this is the questions that you're asking about, like, why did they not choose to write it this way, or why did they choose to write it that way? I'm asking a lot of these same questions, and a lot of times it almost looks like they are celebrating the diversity of the available writings that they have. So basically, in order to kind of show off their chops, like it's very common to even see things that are not written consistently within the same text. And that doesn't mean that there's an error or that they're like, sometimes it can be anything. It could be a conscious choice to kind of show off their scribal chops, to say like, look, here I know how to spell it one way, but here's another way. Like, look how knowledgeable of a scribe I am. Sometimes it could do with space concerns, or sometimes there's just no way to answer why they're choosing to do it one way and not another.
thank you for that answer. So I just got these up here for the fun of it because some confusion about the 049 time determinative. It doesn't appear to be confusing to me when I do look over various texts of how it's used. And I'm trying my hardest to find another term where they strictly and specifically attach 049 to the root and say that it means land. In most instances, it means a town, a city situation, or something like that. But when we translate Kemet, it supposedly translates back to the Black land. Now, in Jesheret, we have this Kasat determinative, which would be indicative of, you know, foreign countries, hill country, and they use it for desertous area, which we also have here translated back as land. Do you know what I'm missing about this 049 glyph and how in this word Kemet is translated to just mean land?
Yeah, so again, so one thing that I will say first, I hope you'll be excited that I can provide other examples of, regions that are given the city determinative.
Okay.
So especially when they say Ta Mehu, the land of Lower Egypt, or Shemau, Upper Egypt. A lot of times they'll give those city determinatives. Not always.
No, I'm with you.
But sometimes.
I'm with you on those, but that appears unfair because they literally say land there. Ta.
Sometimes, but not always. So sometimes it's Ta Mehu, sometimes it's just Mehu, sometimes it's Ta Shemau, sometimes it's just Shemau.
I'm with that.
Yeah.
And even when we see Shemau, we know they talking about Ta Shemau. And Mehu, we know they talking about Ta Mehu. And so the Ta is omitted.
Yeah, but again, going back to now your question about whether we should translate Kemet as the land of Egypt, you're quite correct here in saying that there's nothing clearly in this word or in kind of attestations of this word to say the land of versus Egypt. What this literally says is that which is black. like the
Interesting.
abstract black thing. And then from there, people have added their own flair and nuance in translations, possibly. And again, maybe this is where you're getting maybe where your research is getting at something, but possibly in an inconsistent way with other geographic terms.
Very much so. Now, when the scholars and they've all came to a consensus of somewhat what you told me, then the question is, what is which black? You know what I'm saying? And it comes down to, again, the people of the story. So I'm going to leave the people thinking along a bit and try to see what scholars leaned on besides secondary sources to come to the conclusion that the blackness that this referred to was the Nile silt.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the, I mean, unfortunately, I think one of the major conclusions or one of the major influences here is there is a racist element, certainly in the history of scholarship. But two, I think there's nothing that I know of necessarily. Like there's no one text that I can point you to. And again, this is not my area of expertise, so maybe I'm missing something here, but there's not one text that I can point you to that specifically says by Kemet, we mean the black silt, and specifically silt and the land as opposed to people. But what I think is more convincing to me is the contrast that is drawn between Kemet and Deshret. So these terms are often contrast together, where you can see then, Deshret, clearly it means red. It's given a foreign land determinative, contrasted with Kemet. We know, for example, that, a lot of like funerary figures are depicted with black skin. Again, and they're depicted with black skin in some cases, green skin with other cases, Mediterranean olive skin in other cases, brown skin in other cases, kind of like every color under the sun. So that it does maybe there, Kemet here might speak to something specifically identified with the Nile Valley or the area around the Nile, where we know that most Egyptian cities were, as opposed to something foreign. So I think that's where the assumption comes from, that this must be referring to something like alluvial silt. But in my mind, or at least my understanding, this is a leap in logic, that there is not a clear, absolutely conclusive statement that then we can say, oh yes, by Kemet, they simply meant the black alluvial soil, as opposed to anything else.
Thank you for that. I know you've done Luxor, the Edfu project, and specifically when if I could talk about Edfu HaKhanum, you dealt with Khanum making man at Edfu or not?
That is more Khnum makes man.
Esna, huh?
Esna, yeah, Esna. I was gonna say Esna.
Okay, thank you. So I apologize for that. But I was going to ask about the some terms, but I still have some other ones. So Plutarch said, and that's secondary too. I'm not acting like that's his primary source, but as close as we could get, he said the ancient Egyptians, first he said Osiris was dark, not because he was from Nubia, but he said he was dark because ancient Egyptians thought that moisture darkened things. And so he even went on to say that they gave the creative life-producing qualities of seed to moisture and not to anything about the silt. And now that could get tangled up and used because he says water darkens the earth, it darkens hair. He had this notion that water made your hair dark. And then he said, and for this reason, Osiris was dark. And in contrast to that, Sutek or Set was red. And he said, because of this reason, we can find his words that ancient Egyptians did not like to associate with people of a reddish, sallow, S-A-L-L-O-W color. This is Plutarch's talk. So in my mind, I was like, well, what color did Plutarch consider himself? He had the nerve to say that, Egyptians don't like dealing with people of this reddish color. He said Osiris was dark because of moisture. And then he went on to say that everything that was arid, dry, and desolate that's the nature of the red one, Sutek, right? And so this is the contrast that I think we overlook a little bit when seeing no one ever talks about just the attributes of it being arid and dry, as opposed to the areas around the Nile being moist. Here's another thing, and I'll ask what your comments on this. If it was that important, we would have a god of the Nile mud, not a god of the Nile, because they thought the water was most important. They could not know about mytozoa or all these microscopic things they just like, when the water come, it get popping. And so, not to go too far off, I just would like to hear why is there no attestation to Kemet, who is Asar in his state as the black one? I have a few of those attestations. We know when he's called the black one, he's called Kemet. There is no name for his green effigy. Waj is never listed next to any vignette when we find him green. And we start to figure out the symbolism has just been like they threw it up in the air and just labeled. They didn't pay fine attention to the color symbolism. I shouldn't say it that way. I just think some things got missed when we addressed that color symbolism. So I know my question or my statement has been long-winded, so I'd like to hear from you.
No, I'll try to give a similarly long-winded answer. So I think the one thing, because you were kind of hesitant of Plutarch as a source, and I would second that. I think when we think of one of the things that we know about Egyptian traditions concerning Osiris, and we know this from, for example, like the temples of Dendera, or the Temple of Dendera, where you have this kind of these Osirian chapels on the roof. And we know from these chapels that there's a wealth of traditions about Osiris, and that supposedly each major city in Egypt had its own traditions about Osiris and its own way of looking at things. So that acknowledges the possibility that whatever Hem and his association with Osiris might not only vary across time, but might vary geographically as well. And so certain people or certain communities within the Nile might be able to read more significance into the blackness than others, or might have chosen to read more significance into the blackness of Osiris than others. This is an acknowledgement of the diversity that was ancient Egypt. Now, Plutarch, essentially what he's doing is he's representing a colonial voice that's coming in and essentially trying to take these traditions and make them perceptible by glossing over their difference, so they can be learned by the essentially by the colonizers, if we want to use even that term. And also to make it comprehensible for people that are not Egyptian, because again, admittedly, the Egyptian system was incredibly complex, because you're dealing with like now 3,000 years of really rigorous intellectual history that now someone who doesn't understand the system is trying to understand. So that's the first thing. I think when it comes to wet and dry, I think what Plutarch is doing here, he's importing and viewing ancient Egyptian religion to some extent through the lens of Greek medical knowledge, or through the lens of, I don't know if it's actually that's accurate. I don't know if it's Greek or kind of Eastern Mediterranean, or whether the Egyptian doctors would have kind of considered this. I probably think not, because it's so similar to things like Hippocrates, where they kind of take like these balance of wetness and dryness very, very seriously, and that these are all kind of like the geography of how hot or dry or humid or cold. This will determine not only your culture or your personality, but also, again, the nature of your ethnicity. So he's importing a lot of that baggage, or a lot of that knowledge into his now description of Osiris. Now, the final point that I think I'll make is, you're quite correct that we don't have anyone that's called like the god of the alluvial soil, and that Osiris as you mentioned, is called the black one, is shown with black skin. One of the things that perhaps complicates the lack of evidence for an alluvial god is that I'm not sure I'm not sure if you're aware of the kind of the corn mummies of Osiris. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, so like that seems to me to kind of, that's definitely some association, maybe not with alluvial soil, but with kind of soil and fertility in general. And the fact that like you have these mummies of Osiris that then there's like seeds planted in them so that then they sprout.
But can we go in on the corn mummies real quick?
Yeah.
At the festival, do you think they were black or green?
I think they were probably different colors in different locations and possible multiple colors in the same location.
Oh, I should ask the question better. Because they put a seed into the when we have the germinating Osiris, and then we have the corn mummy Osiris. Now, I don't know if the seed was also placed into the corn mummy and things germinate out. If it was vegetation that came out of the Osiris, I'm just hypothesizing that it might have been the color of the vegetation that grew out of it when it was right to drag around at the festival. Now, some of them were complete corn, and some of these germinating Osirises are not the same as the corn mummies. And so, do I have the wrong impression of a corn mummy? Was it indeed vegetation that grew out of the mummy?
Yeah, no, I think you have the right impression. For if this does get posted, maybe one clarification that I'll make for listeners is that when we say corn mummy, we don't actually mean like corn like you find in Idaho. We mean like like grain essentially, so like wheat or barley or emmer. It's basically just in the UK so a lot of the original scholarship they call it corn because in the UK they call grain corn. So that's why you see it in the scholarship as corn because it means something different in the UK. But I would say that yeah, I think you kind of have it right. And also the important thing to acknowledge when it comes to these grain or corn mummies is that we have a lot of different kinds of them. So like we have like some very, very nice looking ones in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Or sorry, one in particular that I'm thinking of, which is like quite large. And I think it's like wrapped even. So I don't know what color it actually was. I'm guessing it would have been a black color, but it's wrapped in, I think, linen. So you can't see the color of the actual mummy itself or the skin of this figure. But then if you look at places like Karnak, you have these mummies that are made much more. I don't want to say what's the word for this. That are aesthetic. I'll say aesthetics were less of a concern. So they're just kind of these like bundles of mud with wax heads a lot of times. And so when we're talking about corn mummies, we're not just talking about one thing. We're talking about a wealth of phenomenon or a wealth of practices. And again, even when we're looking at these texts about the Osirian festivals and they talk about, okay, well, in this place, this is how you make the corn mummy. In this place, this is how you make the corn mummy. In this place, this is how you make the corn mummy. So there would have been a lot of different corn mummies that maybe had different appearances.
Thank you for that answer. So I see that to be true, everything you said. I just see them attaching this to their green color symbolism and not to the blackness, because when we talk about divine monarchy in the afterlife, this is what I found in my answer. It has something to do with the people. Yes, I tell them all the time, but just like you said, it wasn't all black for the whole 3,000 years. Let's just be clear about that. I mean, that's the way I stated. I think the foundational elements might have looked more like a interior African cultures look today, and that migrated out as nomadic pastoralists, and then they set up this culture. This is why we see all the relevance to the bull symbolism and the black bull, and why the people in many tales the women became black, divine, bovine, and the men did as well. And so that was because they was pastoralists at first. Now, they weren't pastoralists or nomads anymore, so to speak. Cattle was huge. I mean, we know about the king's regalia, him being the bull of the bills, the cattle count. And this is segue into another term for Kemet, that we know as the divine herd. And so when we start talking about how ancient Egyptians seen themselves as cattle, if we go to the Book of the Gates, where as Horus speaks to his people, he's speaking to the Aut Ra, the cattle of Ra. And if we go, and I'm supposed to talk to Dr. Rita Lucarelli about this in the Book of the Dead, where we have the term Winduked for is WNDJ, but it's the big J, Winduked.
Wenju.
Winju, thank you. For cattle and people, depending on how the person translates it. But it's kind of like means the same thing. It's like, I am your cattle, Osiris. And they also use it for one of your people. And so I found some work on cattle symbolism. There's a brother, Reggie Marby, who does some work on this, but there's not too much out there that shows that there is something there, but they see themselves as herds. They call themselves the cattle of Ra. And then for themselves, they chose the name of the black divine herd, which was Kemet. And Kemet to you. Now, when we talk about well, that's not the case, I want to consider that the Kemet for a divine herd, it occurs far before Kemet for the location. That's 12th dynasty. Kemet for the divine herd we can find in the Old Kingdom. And we find the Kemet to you in the 6th dynasty period of Pepi I. And so I'm thinking, how could Kemet to you be a derivative of Kemet as a city situation if they were not even calling it that? That appears to be another anachronism to me. And it starts to lend to the fact that Kemet to you in the earlier time period might have had something to do with like the cattle people or the divine herd, which are people. I'll rest there and see what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you raised so many really interesting points there. I'll do my best to kind of address all of them, but you might have to remind me of a few of them. So I'll try to go kind of with where you started, which is the importance of cattle in ancient Egyptian culture. And this I really think cannot be understated. I think you are spot on here. And this is again even emerges more clearly when the role of cattle in, for example, Egyptian culture is compared and contrasted with the role of livestock or animals in like neighboring Levant or Levantine cultures. Because cattle really seems to be, it doesn't make its way over there. It seems to really be an African thing. And like definitively so. My take on kind of, again, the continuing and expanding relationship between, let's say, Egypt and Nubia, the way that it's often framed by Egyptologists. I kind of think of Egypt and Nubia not really as two separate entities, but as kind of one larger cultural spectrum that then kind of authoritarian systems of power impose divisions upon. And especially with the first dynasty and the city of Aswan, or Elephantine, Abu, you can very clearly see this, where essentially there's no way until the first dynasty of saying what is Egyptian and what is Nubian, and then all of a sudden you have the first dynasty comes in, founds the capital of Memphis, and then plots this huge fortress in the island of Elephantine, to the extent that it almost disrupts access to one of the kind of temples on the island. So it very much seems like an imposition of centralized authority on a local community, which is creating division where there was not division before. The interesting thing is we can kind of see this even later in Egyptian history, where like in the New Kingdom, like the period of the Egyptian Empire, where you have the Egyptians, sending military forces to Nubia and then sending Egypt military forces north as well into Asia. But the character of these forces and the kind of the ways that they're treating the military presence there are extremely different. There does seem to me to be, in the case of Nubia and in the southern case, there seems to be a real interest in a lasting conquest and occupation and incorporation, as opposed to in the north, where it's more of like, okay, we've subdued you. You tell us that you know that we're in charge. Give us some money, and then we'll go home. And I think this is because the Egyptians did see a lot of connections between their own, they saw a lot of these cattle-based connections between their culture and then the culture of the peoples living to the south of them. And a lot of times, unfortunately, the way that that's manifested is through extra violence, because it's like you are almost like us, but you're not exactly like us. But then you can be made to be like us. I think we saw an example of this this is a depressing example to bring up, but you saw when Russia invaded Ukraine, some of the worst atrocities that they committed were in areas that were predominantly Russian ethnicity,
Mm.
because I think they expected to show up and say, okay, you are just like us, you are Russian. And then these people resisted. And then that resistance was confusing and needed to be, again, according to like the view of the kind of the purity of the Russian people as proposed by Putin, needed to be fought against. And so you get kind of more violence sometimes and more of a lasting occupation, not where people see the most difference, but where people see the most connection. Because it's like you're almost like me and you should be like me, but you're not exactly like me, but I can make you like me.
Interesting.
So that's kind of my take. Okay, now you're gonna have to remind me. Okay, now I'm remembering the second thing that you brought up, which is on kind of cattle metaphors. I think this is a really interesting topic. I don't know a lot about it, to be honest. Um, I would say that, of course, the diversity of traditions is always overwhelming when it comes to Egypt. So, like, for example, I was studying one of the things that I study is pharaonic depictions of violence or kind of coercion over their own population. So I have examples of the elite of Egyptian culture being portrayed as birds being put into a net. So I
Mm.
wouldn't say that they're only cattle, they could be other animals as well. But this kind of question sounds like a really interesting one, and I think is worth, if it's something that you're interested in, I'd encourage you to conduct future research on it.
Definitely, I'm gonna keep on, and I appreciate that encouragement, especially to be encouraged by you. You're held in high esteem in your field, as well as you don't even know. We be watching y'all work. I'm telling you, just in layman's terms, I'm feeling endeared to your the way that you giving me knowledge, right? And I'm just telling you, we watching. And so I don't. You do have something in that. I'm sorry. I can't say the name of the book, but I just bought it recently. A recommendation by um Caraconi recommended that I got this work. You have something in there, correct? With Daniela Candela Rowe and yourself as well?
Yeah, it's a challenging assumptions, I think.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. It's like got the green cover. Yeah, I just buying books and trying to get them all over the place. So we are familiar with what's going on. Now I know I'm at my 1 hour point. Do you have just a moment to continue on?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
great. Because I just want to show you some things that I found in my research that I've shown other people and got a lot of contention. I know because people don't really well, sometimes if you go into really old books and pull up things, people have two ways to discredit you. The first way they're going to say is, "Oh, that's a really old source or something." But if it hasn't been debunked or discredited, right, um, then it still stands. And so I want to go into some of the work of Herman Ranka, if I said that correctly,
Hmm.
and persons and names of the Middle Kingdom. So this is just one of my presentations right here. We see a bas relief at the mortuary temple of Ramses III. Where I was showing people you don't really need the determinative on Kim when using it as a color classifier. And so we see different cattle classified in different ways. I'll just zoom through this to
Wait,
get
no,
now.
that's so cool. Can we go back to it? It's
Yep.
really interesting because you have yeah. So the interplay of art and text is something that obviously the Medu not only allows but encourages. So in a way, you could even think of these four cattle as being the classifiers of the words. But it's really cool here because we have it's like they're collecting all these, like, literally a rainbow of cattle. So the bottom one is the black cattle, the one above it is the red cattle, the one above it is the white cattle, and then the one above it is sob. That means kind of
Speckled, like
multicolor
yeah,
pattern.
speckled,
Yeah.
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 Keep continue.
No, I mean it's just a really interesting example because and again what I would say is going on here, because this is in the Temple of Ramses III, And so basically what he's trying to do, what it's in his interest of doing, is to show control, because he's the one that's holding the leashes of all of these cattle, that he's kind of, in control of all the different ethnicities or breeds of cattle, just as he is in control of all the different peoples that might live in the world.
Wonderful answer. That's dang. I was saying that to people. They don't understand me. So I need to get some credentials. Now, here we're looking at the rock tombs of Mier. This isn't Herman Rank's work yet. We're dealing with Alyard Blackman. And in the rock tombs of Mier, we have, so this is what I use when people say Egyptians didn't call themselves black. I'm like, yo, we still have to know what they meant by that. But their term, Kim, I can show you over and over they call themselves black. Now, I'm not arguing. What Herman Ranker argues is that it was a physical attribute. Yeah, okay, he just gave it up, and we'll look at some of that. But here, Blackman, in his work, he says this, if we see Happy Jasher, they're brothers, and we can read it all, but if we look at Happy Jasher, this is one of the brothers, and then this is in his tomb, Happy Kim. Now, they say even in Arabic in Arabic cultures today, they would use these colors, black and red, to distinguish between two siblings who did not necessarily have to appear black and red, but the one who was called the darker color would be the darker of the two siblings. And so and now the translator here, they call him Happy the Black. But to me, I think this is just like Happy, the one who was darker than his brother, Happy the Red. But there's a whole family of Happy Kims, Peppy Kim, and now I talked to grammarians about this, and some tried to argue it was a title. Herman Ranker did not place it in a title, and I don't know of any title associated with Kim. And we see it in the adjectival position, and it always occurs that way as it's modifying the noun, and it simply means black. How do you see these attestations?
So I will admit here, I'm not an expert, and this is the first time I'm encountering these terms. So I don't really want to offer too many comments, because actually you sound much more knowledgeable about this than I do. But the one thing that I would say, again, I don't know about contemporary. I don't know how these terms are used in contemporary Arabic Egypt or Islamic Egypt, or like I don't know if there are kind of modern parallels to this. But one of the things I think we could definitely say is, even if you go to Egypt today, like there are black people in Egypt. Like that's like just an undeniable fact. So I wouldn't say, I don't necessarily have a problem reading this not in a kind of literal way, but also I am just looking at it for the first time now. So I really have no idea.
I like that answer, but I know you got some skills. So when you at Luxor and you step to the wall, have you trained on what you're about to see, or have you ever had anything thrown in front of you where you just had to determine what it meant on the spot?
So I think it's a mix of both, because obviously the training and experience inform everything that you're looking at. But then a lot of times what I would do is I'd say, okay, I think I know what this is, but I'm not an expert in this. And then I'd go back to the house at the end of the day, and then you'd have to do research on that.
Definitely.
And then you'd bring the research back into the field the next day, and you could say, okay, now that I learned that, now that I saw some comparative scenes, I can better understand what's going on here.
So that process in the field, I'm sure it's all technology now. It's not sitting there tracing. How much do you actually? I seen a photo of you sitting there tracing like an old school Egyptologist. I was wondering, was that for a photo op, or was that like, is it really time that you have to sit there and not use technology?
There really are times, and the reason for that, I've left the project now to take the job here. But I had a very good experience working there when I was in Luxor. But I don't know essentially how they're contemporarily operating. But my understanding is that because there's a backlog, there's a huge backlog of these drawings that have been made, and many that were made in the 90s or early 2000s were made before technology was really an option. So they're still doing to try to get through that backlog, we're still doing kind of traditional epigraphic methods. But then more recently, yes, like things that are just now being recorded, they're being recorded with technology.
Wonderful. I mean, yeah, I got plenty of questions, but I won't bog your time down with the. I'll stay up, keep it to the knowledge. But hopefully, one day we can talk again, and I can learn more about your trips and some of the things that I would like to know. So here's a pyramid of Pepi, the second pyramid, text 1042, and it's a short one. And I always don't like using this one because they could be referring to a black sack. I actually have the primary, well, a facsimile of the primary, and this is just a reconstruction from Thesaurus Lingua Egypti. Now, face falls on face with this, we see the core and then the her with the three, and so I don't understand face falls on face, but apparently this is Shu grabbing Pepi to take him back to the to be amongst the Neteru, and so this black skin where we see Anim or whatever, Anim, and then we got the determinative for hair, and then the Kim modifying the skin. Am I reading that wrong?
So pyramid texts are always weird. This also, I'd say in the transliteration, we might have one too many or two too many hairs, because it does seem to say like faces fell or may fall on the black color.
Yeah, because where's because of the? You're right. I never
Yeah,
seen because of the.
there's no because of. I think basically, so hair can mean because, but in order to make that happen, there has to be too many hairs. And we only have two hairs. The first one is clearly faces. So faces fall on, the yinim certainly can mean color, especially with the hair determinative. So faces fall on color, the black color. Seshu. Shu. Yeah, I'm not sure what seshu means. I'd have to look that up.
I can pull it up, but I think that was what they was using for picked up.
Yeah.
Now, and this translation is by Thesaurus Lingua, I mean the TLA. So
Yeah.
just for the record, I didn't make this translation. I was kind of agree with you about the too many hers or whatever, but it's so much of this. I just want to get your comments, and I don't want to take all of your day, so I'm just going to go through them. We understand that on the Stela of Abku, we do find a Kemi where they're talking about, even though I don't have that here, they're talking about Osiris as the Black One. But I was coming here to get the rankings work of persons and names of the Middle Egyptian. So this is me copying directly from the website, just so everyone knows. This is my opinion on the screen. And Herman Ranker took the name Takemi when he found it in the 3 attestations, and one of them was the same person. That's what that kind of means. The Dark One, and when he said the type of name, it was demonstrative pronoun plus an attribute, and the attribute being a physical quality. So here we see they made a nisbah out of the term, the root Kim, put a reed leaf on it, you know what I'm saying? And they make Kemi, the Black One, or one associated to darkness. And the Ta, they really used, he called it a demonstrative pronoun. I guess definite article or demonstrative pronoun. But this is saying the Dark One. Would you read, and would you read this the same way?
So I will also say I'm not an expert in personal names, and I'm also not a spelling in. So I think these sources, they seem to be, especially the first one, is coming from an administrative text. So I think there's a few different ways to read this. You could either say it's Takemi is short for Takemit. Again, so the Black feminine one. And then we know it's clearly feminine there because we have the ta instead of a pa. So then Kemi would probably originally have had a feminine ending. But again, this is not Kemeti, but Kemit. So the Black female one as opposed to the one that belongs to that which is Black. The other possibility of reading this is Ka meaning she of. But again, I think that's too late. That would probably be 10N Kemi for this, but it's also possible that this would mean she of the black one. So maybe she of Osiris, depending on the date of this attestation, though.
Wonderful. Trust me, these answers are just, I can't wait. So now we got just another attestation, and over here, this is how many times we found people calling themselves Kim on different stelae all over the place. And again, he used this name as a physical quality. I don't think there's not any reason to, I mean, Egypt wasn't called Kim. And so that right there is going to be a problem for people who want to make this refer back to, oh, this means one of Egypt. And so we could keep going. Now, these are females who use the term Kemet as the dark one, physical qualities. And so I'm really only showing you this because when I show my audience, they act like I'm making things up or scamming or, can't really get these attestations qualified or perused by a person with credentials like yourself.
The one thing I'd say, yeah. So the only thing that I'd say is that just keep in mind that Kem also, I just saw it go past in a slide, but that Kem can also mean to be complete. So a lot of times it's hard to say whether the meaning, especially in a personal name, is based on, from the word black or based from the word to be complete.
Yeah, and so we've been getting to the bottom of that one too. One of my grammarians challenged me to find a Kim with the hieroglyph to settle that score, and we found it in the name of a person called Kemu. And we also found it in Osiris Kemi. We have an attestation with the hieroglyph, which lets us know that they want us to refer back to the color in that instance. And so I appreciate that. And so I don't want to keep you all day, so I'm just gonna get to some of this final things.
The other thing that maybe, and again, if they're both being the only reason that we can tell their difference is because of the determinative, maybe they're seeing a connection between the color and completeness.
I actually think there's a term for when you're growing of old age. This is like sukkim or ekim. Now, akim is a shield, I think, but there's like sukkim where they put the consonant S on the front, and it means to grow to old age. Now, I understand exactly what you're saying by using modern idioms that help me understand ancient Egyptian texts. I'm a rapper, right? And so I'm an MC professionally. I'm a poet, and when it comes to philology, I deal with wordplay, and I can understand it, and I notice it in places others have not. Some should go back and look at the Cannibal Hymn like a battle rap and equate the two type of in hip hop, and not to go off on a tangent, in hip hop, one of the main ways to defeat your adversary was to devour them. We call it eating MCs, you see? And so I was like, well, this is the same schemata from the Cannibal Hymn that people understand. He wants to be amongst the Neteru as a boss, so he's going to eat them. He's going to devour them. And I'm like, why is y'all acting like this is cannibalism? And so I guess people miss that, and I think that they're looking at things from other ways can open up perspectives. And so I'm pulled up Crumb's Coptic dictionary. Right? And we're looking at the root in Crumb's Coptic dictionary. And even he says that Kami can be a black person or a thing. And so I don't think we disagree with that. And you said enough that I can show people, look, I'm not just making this up, that the scholarship says this is not politically motivated. But I have taken up an axe because I know some things that I never had to speak about before. And with all of this gross stuff that they're doing after the Cleopatra movie, I'm like, well, let's stop give me my ball. They like Egypt is my ball and I'll take it and run with it if you play with it in ways I don't want you playing this game. And so if any sensible man knows an area like that over thousands of years with all the trade, you got everybody there at the end. But we also got to talk about how any market works. Someone has to set up the market. Trade don't just pop out the blue. Someone has to have these items that people beseech after. And these were the people of Kemet, even though they didn't call it that, at that time period. I argue that these would be the people who set up this, that brought all the other people into now we got the multicultural Egypt. That's totally fine. When people exclude Black people, like, oh no, they was Nubians, that is nonsense. As a matter of fact, because I'm getting scared of how much time you got left. So let me ask you. Because I'm trying to run through because I'm scared you might be going too long. So how many minutes you think? How much more time we got?
We want maybe take another 10 minutes.
That's great. Thank you. So I appreciate that. With that being said, I'm going to just go through a few of these primaries I got. Hopefully we can see what's going on here. Hold on. Sorry about that. Get to this.
You know, while you're looking for this, I should say that one of the things that we've been looking into, or that like has been motivating a lot of my research lately, and it goes back to this question of origins. And because, you know, like there's always, again, like you said, that there people are always like looking for like the first moment where like this thing happened, and then using it to exclude or push out other groups that they don't want, that are motivated, and these exclusion are have contemporary motivations, not ancient motivations. And we see the past being misused in this way kind of all the time. So one of the things that kind of we're thinking about in terms of research these days is to look at anything that we consider to be a recognizable culture was actually created through exchange and interconnection, rather than kind of, you know, one single group, especially not one single ethnicity, kind of starting something, but that things only start when you have people of different groups in the same place.
You're right. And I see that even we see a lot of I don't want to the material culture. It's hard to tell it apart when we get down to those areas, but they wanted to be told apart for some strange reason. Like they didn't come up like rocking all of their, or should I say, they didn't preserve all of their traditional Nubian culture, because it would have just been what Nubia was. Something they drew a line in the sand at some point and was like, we're not down with that old tradition anymore. We do it like this, and we're willing to fight over it now. That's how it the unification took place to me. But who knows? So you said something earlier, or we were talking about something that made me want to pull up this text, and I want to get your opinion on this as we close down. What this appears to say to me is the Sun people, Nubians belonging to Egypt, because we got the new here. But I'll let you see. And then we got this. This is a Hemen, which is going to Hemenet, or HMNNT, a word that means some people. But you can tell me.
Mehmet.
Yep.
Am I supposed to be seeing it? Because
Oh, you're not seeing anything. I'm sorry.
I see the the thumbnails, but I don't see anything up close.
Oh, you see it now?
Yeah, now I got it.
Oh, great.
Okay, recitation. This is late. Philae, yeah. Yeah, this is from Philae. Okay. The Pedge to you, the Un to you. So yeah, the interesting thing here, so what I see is like, I'll see a lot of different, it would be a mistake to call them ethnicities, but it's like the recitation by, or like a recitation, the Bow people, the Iyuntiu, so some type of maybe tribesman, maybe, I don't know how to read this throw stick here, maybe the Asiatics, and then we have a lot of these foreign people, and then we have the Henmemet, and this is the okay. So then the Henmemet and the Nubians of Egypt. This is what you're
exactly. So I'm glad that you pointed out that these was other people. Now we do know these I went to you to be also Southern bowmen, right?
Yeah, I think yeah, certainly bowmen are usually equated with Nubians in Egyptian culture. The interesting thing that I'd say about this is that especially as we see in essentially as we see in the Roman period in Egypt, you increasingly see a kind of a division between, of course, there's conflict between Rome and kind of the Nubian state to the south of them. Um, but we also kind of increasingly see this kind of like pan Eastern Mediterranean, North African culture developing, where you again kind of have Philae as this really interesting point where local communities manage to overcome these authoritarian boundaries that are being imposed on them.
Hmm.
So you have essentially like Philae as this pilgrimage site, not only for people in Egypt, but also for Nubian communities and Nubian communities, especially that are not sedentary.
Interesting.
So
So,
it's an important, it's a really, really important site that kind of again brings together a religious community, which I think again says that whatever religion existed amongst these people was more common than the boundary that is made by, you know, pharaohs further north. Um, there's more in common that these people have more in common than this kind of artificial boundary may lead us to believe.
so grammatically, do you think there's connection between grammatically? Do you think there's connection between the Sun people and the Hesiu here?
Based on this text alone, I would say not necessarily. But it's possible. But I think the Sun folk traditionally are more southern people
Mhm.
in texts when they're given a geographic kind of range. But
Mhm.
I'm not sure here. I would say that there is a grammatical relationship between these people and Nubia and Nubians meaning Nehesiu here. I basically just see this as a list of people that would have been, you know, maybe known to people at Philae.
I'm with you on that. I kind of don't see it as that too, because I don't think they was saying Sun people like melanin people. Like I tell people no, but what I think about this is Heliopolis. That's what they say, that this is people of Heliopolis, and I don't think the original name of Heliopolis has something to do with the sun, but I can't recall it like that. So how could
No,
that work?
I disagree with that interpretation as well.
Exactly.
I would not see this as a variation or a kind of there's no grammatical reasons to associate Shenmehmet as a term with Iunu Heliopolis.
Mhm.
Um, but I would need to look more closely and at the term Shenmehmet in
Mhm.
order to really have anything intelligent to say other than to say I don't feel comfortable saying that there's anything in this to say that these are specifically connected with Nehesi here, other than just being, you know, people that would have frequented the temple probably.
Mhm.
Um, and I disagree with the reading that says that Shen Mehmet are specifically associated with Heliopolis. I think that's just based on supposition. Well, if they're sun folk, where's the major sun city? It must be Heliopolis, literally means sun city. So therefore, they must be associated with Heliopolis.
I appreciate that. And in closing, I'll ask, so to the person who wrote this at Philae, these Nubians knew, or Nehesi knew Kemet. Now we understand everything that they could have migrated in, but in his mind, they were residents of Egypt and not like some other people. Or
I see again here, I might read this as a distinction between settled people of the Nile Valley and those that are more kind of sedentary, or sorry, those that are less sedentary. So I would read this the Nehesiu and New Kemet not necessarily as a north-south border, but as people that are can be found within the Nile Valley itself.
inside Kemet, correct?
Yeah.
Word up. I appreciate you. Yo, this was wonderful. Man, I drive to LA and we'll be talking for days, so don't even trip. If anything go down and I'm in the area, hopefully, if you have time, I'll reach out to you and see what's going on. But just on the standard and professional thing, I appreciate the fact that when you were making your considerations about having this conversation, that something in your head said, let's do it. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I really appreciate that. There's not too many scholars who are just willing to dialogue. And hopefully we could talk again and do a public discourse, or I'll contact you later to see what you think about this video.
Yeah, that would be great. And just to echo one thing that you mentioned earlier is that one of the things that I and a lot of my colleagues at UCLA are big believers in is, again, not gatekeeping knowledge about and saying that, you know, only people in academia have knowledge, that there's multiple ways of generating knowledge, and that the most fruitful exchanges occur when exchanges occur. So that you know, dialogues, that academics should not be, you know, isolated from members of the community, and that ancient worlds, and especially ancient Egypt, should be made to be relevant to people's lives today. So I think we're big believers in doing this. So I'd look forward to maybe continuing that larger mission as well.
I appreciate that. Yo, thanks for taking the time. And I'm gonna say, if you need anything from me regarding anything, feel free to reach out. And thank you.
No, thanks a ton. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.